that I want to talk about carefully, because I'm aware of how training camp coverage usually goes, and I don't want to be another voice adding to the July noise. Every single year, without fail, someone tells you their quarterback is unguardable in shorts. Someone tells you the running back arrived. Someone tells you this defense is completely different, and this is finally the year everything comes together. It happens with the predictability of a calendar event, and most of it evaporates the moment feels different sound. I've heard them applied to every franchise in profession, producing genuine reassessment rather than seasonal optimism. I am saying that with complete awareness of how it typically lands. What makes this different is that the specific details hold up when you actually push on them. They don't soften under scrutiny. They get more interesting. That distinction is worth paying attention to. Fernando Mendoza has to be the starting point, because everything else on this roster orbits what happens at the quarterback position. The early camp reporting on him goes well past the standard feel-good rookie narrative that gets assembled and published before anyone has watched a meaningful, competitive rep. Before the football even enters the conversation, the physical profile demands acknowledgement. 6'5", north of 230 pounds, built with the long arms and structural frame of a quarterback designed to absorb contact and keep his eyes working downfield rather than reacting to the sensation of pressure. That quality is more significant than most quarterback evaluations give it credit for. A real number of players at this position get rattled, not from any mental fragility, but because their bodies weren't constructed to take a shot and immediately refocus on coverage developing 20 yards away. They start anticipating contact before it arrives. Their processing slows at exactly the moments it needs to accelerate. Mendoza's physical foundation was built for this game at the most basic level, and that quality won't show up in a completion percentage until October, but it will absolutely show up in October. The arm strength conversation deserves directness rather than diplomatic softening, because the pre-draft concerns were legitimate, and the people who raised them weren't uninformed. Real evaluators with genuine NFL backgrounds questioned whether his velocity would translate to a level where windows are tighter and defensive backs are faster, and the margin for late or imprecise delivery is essentially zero. What early camp reporting is showing is that those concerns were real but significantly overstated. He's not going to leave defensive backs frozen, wondering what just happened to a football. What he will do is drive the ball into every window Kubiak's system creates, on time, with enough authority to make a receiver's job easier and a cornerback's positioning considerably more uncomfortable. And here is what I think matters more than any velocity measurement. In the right system, an accurately timed arm attached to elite processing and elite decision-making is worth dramatically more than a cannon attached to ordinary football instincts. Mendoza has the former. Everything being assembled in Las Vegas is specifically built to leverage that combination. The comparison circulating through camp pair Sam Darnold's mobility and body type with Jared Goff's pocket size and frame. That's a reasonable visual reference, and I understand why people reach for it. But I want to push back hard on leaning too deeply into the Darnold parallel, because Darnold's career is not just a physical template. It's a documented case study in what organizational dysfunction does to a talented young quarterback when the surrounding environment is hostile to his development at every level. The Jets surrounded him with structural chaos and watched a player with real ability nearly drown before circumstances finally changed. When they did change, when he landed in a functional system with real coaching and real organizational infrastructure, he looked like a completely different quarterback. Not because he transformed as a player, because he finally had the conditions his game required to express itself. That's the entire point as it relates to Mendoza. He doesn't have to survive a damaging organization before finding a functional one. He walks into the right conditions on day one of his professional career. That distinction matters more than any arm grade or physical comparison ever could. Now the detail from this camp that tells you more about who Fernando Mendoza actually is than any measurement or combine number. He turned down an invitation to the White House. I want you to genuinely sit with what that means. He's a rookie quarterback selected first overall in the entire NFL draft. The football world spent months debating him, And when that invitation arrived, a moment that would have generated enormous coverage, photographs, and social media presence that most people in his position would have considered obvious and deserved, his response was to stay at the facility, take extra repetitions, and keep working through the playbook. Nobody orders a first overall pick to decline that invitation and go throw routes instead. That is not a coaching staff directive. It comes from somewhere specific inside a player, from a precise internal understanding of where he is in his development and what this moment actually demands, independent of what generates the most favorable outside perception. And it doesn't stop there. Reports describe Mendoza arriving before official practice begins to take snaps with center Tyler Linderbaum, both under center and from the shotgun, building the timing and communication their partnership needs when games actually count. These are two players new to each other and new to this organization, learning a new offensive system simultaneously. The almost wordless understanding a quarterback and center need to develop, how the ball arrives when weight shifts, how a snap feels under different defensive alignments, how to communicate at the line without telegraphing anything, takes hundreds of real repetitions to construct. You cannot manufacture it in a film room. Mendoza isn't waiting for the practice schedule to make those opportunities available. He is out there before anyone is watching, building what will matter in the moments that determine outcomes. That detail tells me more about who this player is than anything else I've read from this camp. The quarterback competition deserves honest treatment. Kirk Cousins is currently tracking toward a Week 1 start. Before the emotional reaction takes over, let me be clear about something. The argument for managing Mendoza's introduction carefully is not organizational cowardice dressed up as strategy. It's grounded in real developmental history with real consequences. There's a legitimate school of thought holding that the most responsible thing you can do for a young quarterback is control his initial exposure to live NFL pressure until the system is genuinely internalized and his confidence is built on actual structural foundation rather than raw ability operating without real support. 20 years ago, this was standard operating procedure. First-round quarterbacks sat, absorbed, and were protected from live fire until coaching staffs had genuine evidence of readiness rather than just physical talent and potential. The Darnold cautionary tale applies directly here. Thrown into organizational chaos before any real foundation existed beneath him, the accumulation of bad plays and losing environments built compensatory habits that took years to identify and undo. His career nearly ended before he turned 26. The lesson that story teaches isn't that Darnold was always going to find his way. The lesson is that developmental timelines need protection, and organizations that strip that protection away due to external pressure pay for it in ways that don't become fully visible until the damage is already done. That said, here is my position stated directly. If Mendoza goes through the full competitive evaluation of training camp and demonstrates to this coaching staff that he is ready to operate in this system from week 1, the decision has to be to start him. And when that decision gets made, it needs to come with a real organizational commitment. Minimum 10 games before any serious evaluative recalibration. Not 5. Not 3 after a couple of rough outings followed by a panic move back to the veteran. 10 games, because anything shorter is not a genuine developmental evaluation, it's a panic window. Young quarterbacks do not grow inside panic windows. They grow inside environments where the organizational commitment behind the decision to start them is deep enough to survive early adversity without immediately reaching for an exit. Now the secondary, because this is the most underrated story of this entire rebuild, and it has not been getting the attention it deserves. Geron McCoy, taken at pick 101, is practicing. The knee is responding to the early camp workload. The athleticism that made him a consensus first-round evaluation before the injury is reportedly showing up on that practice field in ways that justify everything the pre-injury tape suggested. There are scouts across this league who genuinely believed McCoy was the most likely candidate to be the first cornerback taken in this entire draft class if he had stayed healthy. The Raiders acquired him in the 4th round. If that knee holds up through a full professional workload, this organization found a potential cornerstone cornerback at a fraction of the cost his actual ceiling demands. His development timeline belongs entirely to Las Vegas at whatever pace his body authentically requires. Travis Stokes is generating buzz that actually means something specific rather than the generic. He looks comfortable variety that gets attached to every player in every camp at some point. Elite closing speed combined with the physical willingness to support run defense aggressively and the movement flexibility to operate in coverage space when assignments demand it. That combination at the box safety position has been a recurring structural weakness for this defense across multiple seasons. Stokes looks like the specific answer this defense has been searching for at that spot, and when you zoom out and compare this secondary to what the Raiders were putting on the field 2 or 3 seasons ago, when it functioned as essentially a guaranteed completion any time an opposing quarterback decided to target it, the transformation is not incremental improvement. The third and fourth corners on this current roster are better football players than who was starting for this organization during those difficult years. Rob Leonard and Clint Kubiak have rebuilt this secondary from the foundation. That is what the observable evidence is showing. Here is the implication of that secondary transformation that barely gets mentioned, despite being one of the most important competitive dynamics on this entire team. What it means specifically for Maxx Crosby. Crosby has been one of the most genuinely disruptive edge rushers in this league for years, and he's done it while operating behind a secondary that consistently provided opposing quarterbacks with a rational, available escape valve. When a quarterback knows he can tuck and scramble because the coverage behind the pass rush cannot maintain integrity, the disruption a great pass rusher generates gets functionally neutralized regardless of how dominant that rusher actually is. Crosby wins the edge, the quarterback escapes, the sack numbers stay modest. The real dominance gets buried under the limitations of the players behind him. Now, give Crosby a secondary that genuinely forces quarterbacks to hold the ball. That makes scrambling feel dangerous rather than sensible. And the disruption he already generates becomes exponentially more visible and impactful across every statistic that matters. Elite secondaries amplify elite pass rushers. The Raiders are constructing that combination simultaneously for the first time in Crosby's entire career. That story may define the entire second half of this season. The wide receiver competition below the top of the depth chart is legitimately interesting and deserves attention as roster cut decisions approach. Malik Benson is standing out with a quick release off the line and real precision in his route running. The kind of separation-creating reliability that builds a quarterback's trust quickly, because when the ball goes to that spot, the concept actually works as designed. Dante Thornton has extraordinary measurables, the wingspan, speed, and frame that draw comparisons to the most physically gifted receivers in recent evaluation history. But measurables don't run routes, and measurables don't make catches in traffic. He needs to translate the physical ceiling into consistent football execution. The player I find most genuinely compelling is E.J. Williams, and largely for a reason that traditional talent evaluation frameworks consistently undervalue. He played alongside Mendoza at Indiana. The timing is already constructed. The trust is already established through hundreds of real competitive repetitions. Having a receiver in that building who already speaks the quarterback's offensive language fluently has concrete competitive value that shows up in the moments a developing quarterback needs somewhere reliable to go. Reports indicate Williams has shown enough in camp that if he ends up on the practice squad, multiple franchises will immediately be calling to claim him. That is not a player you lose without real downstream consequences. At running back, the structure is clear. Mike Washington is the primary complement to Ashton Jeanty, explosive, athletically exceptional, with a testing profile placing him among the most physically gifted players at his position in recent combine history. Roman Hemby is currently the most likely undrafted free agent to secure a backup spot. He won't overwhelm you with one elite isolated attribute, but he's complete and functional across every dimension the role genuinely requires. Pass protection, receiving, running between the tackles, special teams value. That wholeness is exactly what backup running backs need to justify a roster spot on a team with real competitive ambitions. At the third quarterback position, Clark currently holds the edge, and the coaching staff's priority in that evaluation is system alignment. finding a quarterback whose instincts mirror what this offense actually runs, rather than someone whose natural tendencies would force the entire infrastructure to adapt around him in an emergency. A backup who speaks a fundamentally different offensive language introduces real risk at precisely the moment backup quarterbacks actually get called upon. Here is the full picture I want you to carry away. This roster is structurally different from anything this organization has assembled in years. Not different in the press release sense, not cosmetically upgraded and repackaged as transformation while underlying problems persist. Actually different in the ways that produce durable competitive outcomes, rather than just manufacturing enthusiasm for a season before everything resets. The secondary moved from genuine organizational liability to emerging strength in a compressed timeline. The pass rush is anchored by one of the most disruptive edge players in the sport, who finally has real coverage operating behind him. The offensive system is quarterback-friendly and being run by coaches who understand how to build around a young player's development, rather than simply extracting short-term production at long-term cost. And at the center of all of it is a first overall pick who declined a White House invitation to throw extra routes, who shows up before official practice begins to build timing with his center in sessions nobody required. The remaining questions are real. Who starts week 1? How the receiver room settles? Whether McCoy's knee holds through a full professional workload? But these are the questions of a team with genuine upside and a clear direction, not the questions of a franchise spinning without an identity or a plan. Everything coming out of Las Vegas right now is pointing directly toward that distinction.